Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 20 of my Lancastrians and Yorkists vlog. This time we're going to talk about the Cornish rebellion of 1497 and finish off the Perkin Warbeck story and do a bit of assessment of the threats to Henry VII generally and how successfully he overcame them. So the Cornish rebellion 1497 happened just as Henry VII was preparing to fight Scotland and to deal with Perkin Warbeck. And actually those two things are connected because the high taxation that Henry VII levied on the country to raise an army to fight the Scots was the very thing which tipped the Cornish into rebellion. They were upset, just like the people of Yorkshire had been in 1489, at being asked to contribute to a war that they saw as nothing to do with them. The people of the south being a long way from Scotland and therefore not fearing a Scottish invasion in the slightest. This perhaps is a sign that Henry VII did bring some of these things on himself. As I said last time, that you could see the Yorkshire Rebellion as coming out of Henry's slightly naive way of raising money for the war against France. It also is suggestive of kind of an undercurrent of antipathy, of ambivalence towards the early Tudor regime. That's not so much that there were people out there supporting rebellion all the time, but just that there wasn't much loyalty to it, loyalty to it. So that when things like this happened, people were easier to get out on the streets marching with their pitchforks. And this time they marched their pitchforks from Bodmin up to Somerset, led by Michael Joseph, a blacksmith, and Thomas Flamank. At Wells, Lord Audley joined them and became kind of the most prominent of the leaders. Audley's spelled A-U-D-L-E-Y. Nobody really knows why he joined such a foolhardy, obviously going to fail expedition. But his father had been a friend of Edward IV. Somerset generally appears to have been quite underwhelmed by the Tudor regime. Maybe he was pro-Warbeck. He was brother-in-law of Richard the Younger, Prince in the Tower, which is Warbeck's alias, kind of alleged identity. But basically, we're not sure. The Cornish rebels failed to enter Bristol, but they called on Warbeck to lead them, and they continued eastwards through Salisbury, Winchester, Farnham and Guildford, kind of through the south and up to south of London. They assemble on Blackheath, where there are about 15,000 of them, and then Henry VII's forces come out on the 17th of June and defeat them pretty straightforwardly. About 1,000 were killed. The two ringleaders, Joseph and Flamank, plus Lord Audley, were executed. Those are the only three, though. The rest of them kind of flee back to Cornwall, hide under the bed and all that. Henry VII sets up quite a lengthy investigation to try and identify those people who had taken part in it, and they're fined for their role in the rebellion, showing his determination to root people out, but also an element of mercy in not killing more people. How serious you think this element of the rebellion is depends a bit on your perspective. It was defeated very straightforwardly once it got to Blackheath, but the fact that it got all the way from Cornwall to London, past several nobility, and picks up Lord Audley on the way, does sort of show that there's a problem here. And it's a bigger problem than perhaps it ought to have been. It's a bigger problem than it would have been perhaps for kings like Henry V or Edward IV that we've looked at in the past. Anyway, there is a part 2 to the Cornish rebellion, and that does involve the tail end of the story of Perkin Warbeck. He landed in Cornwall on the 7th of September from Ireland and led an assault on Exeter. Exeter closed its doors to him and he was unsuccessful. This was happening at the same time that Henry VII was trying to deal with the Scots, and it's partly the reason why Henry VII decides to sit down with the Scots and come to a peace deal, as I said last time. So Warbeck is a tricky kind of problem in the south, running around England, picking up not very much support. But after about 2 weeks, that threat is extinguished, and Warbeck is on the run. He was quite quickly captured at Beaulieu Abbey in the New Forest. He confessed to being an impostor. He was kept under house arrest, brought out into public several times to show everyone that he was who he was, and to presumably say that he wasn't who he had said he was. After 8 months of house arrest, he tried to escape, but was recaptured. He was put in the stocks, which is a low-class punishment, and then put in the Tower of London. The end of the story is that in 1499, he and Edward, Earl of Warwick, tried to escape the Tower of London together. This time, they were both recaptured, and Warbeck was hanged, and Edward, Earl of Warwick, was beheaded. Again, Warbeck is hanged to emphasise his low-class status, i.e. he is not Richard, the Prince of the Tower. Edward, Earl of Warwick, is beheaded as a nobleman. There is a theory that Henry VII has engineered them trying to escape by leaving an escape route marked out with flashing neon signs saying escape this way, in order to remove them as threats, in order to basically to set up their executions. And this was done because at the time he was negotiating a marriage deal between his son Arthur and Catherine of Aragon, and the Spanish wanted to be certain that that Henry VII and the Tudor regime was completely secure, with no threats to them on the horizon. In terms of Cornwall, Henry VII calmed things down in Cornwall by cancelling the next round of taxation, and of course signing a peace deal with the Scots, which meant that there was no war to fund in any case. After the death of Warwick in 1499, Edmund de la Pole was the chief Yorkist claimant to the throne. I say chief, he was the last remaining Yorkist claimant to the throne. He was the brother of Lincoln and the new Earl of Suffolk. Seemed loyal to Henry VII, but left the country in 1499. Henry VII persuaded him to return. Things were all right for a couple of years, and then in 1501 he left for Flanders. This is all really after our topic ends. But Henry VII arrested all of his relatives, attainted 51 nobles. The most famous victim was Sir James Tyrrell, Tyrell, former constable of the Tower. Before his execution, for what it's worth, Tyrrell confessed to killing the Princess of the Tower back under Richard III. In 1506, actually, Philip of Flanders had to shelter from a storm in England, and as part of the hospitality, he was persuaded to give up Suffolk, who was hiding in Flanders. And Philip agreed that he would, so long as Suffolk wasn't executed, and he was kept thereafter. This is Edmund de la Pole. He was kept thereafter in the Tower of London. So that concludes our little tour through the threats to Henry VII in his power. One of the things that you might get asked about is to weigh up the seriousness of the threat, of each of the threats, and perhaps collectively, which of them was most significant. We've already started to do that, haven't we? That Lovell's rebellion is pretty damp squib, really. It does involve some noblemen, but they flee before Henry even comes out with his army. Lambert Simnel does face up with an army, but it's a light army with limited support, doesn't really gain any traction in England. Perkin Warbeck, on the other hand, does come with an army and actually invades from the north and picks up support all the way around England and is at large for quite a long time. But even so, it's hard to see any of these characters, Perkin Warbeck, Lambert Simnel or Lovell, any of them, even with the support of Lincoln or William Stanley, which gives them both credibility, by the way. Lambert Simnel's support from Lincoln and Stanley's support of Perkin Warbeck would have given them some credibility, but you can't see any of them really becoming king. And the fact that none of them are actually claimants to the throne, that Simnel and Warbeck are both pretending to be claimants to the throne, is significant itself and means that they are less serious. None of these are as serious as the threats that faced Henry VI. None of them are as serious as the threats that faced Edward IV. Obviously, none of them are as serious as the threat that Henry Tudor had been to Richard III. So, not very serious, really. The most significant of them, I would say, is Perkin Warbeck, unless you're going to count Margaret of Burgundy as a threat herself, and I would say that she is the bigger threat. In terms of the two rebellions, Yorkshire and Cornwall, the Cornish rebellion is more significant because it involves more people and it gets to London, but even then it's defeated quite easily. The reasons it's more it's more significant, I think, at the distance that it travels, the amount of people involved. The fact that this is the second time a rebellion has happened too, I think, makes it more significant as well. So, but having said all of that, it shouldn't be forgotten that, I suppose the two things. One is it shouldn't be forgotten that these are all quite low quality claimants to the throne and low quality rebellions in terms of their threat to Henry. Never at any time does he really seem to be in danger of losing control of the throne. Having said that, one of the criticisms of him is, despite the fact that he is in a very secure position, he still faces these problems and threats. And that's kind of a sign of, whilst his position is secure, he is not someone who is loved and embraced by the country at large. And that kind of means both he's been successful, but also perhaps not successful. Nevertheless, as we know, when he dies, he hands power on to Henry VIII, and the Tudor regime is kind of one of the most secure regimes, dynasties that what we've seen in our history. So I hope that helps. Next time we'll be starting to look at the breadth topics, which are taking a step back and looking across the whole period at a few themes. So I hope that's useful, and I'll see you then.